After I came back to life, the very first thing I changed wasn't my hairstyle or my phone password or the way I smiled at people. It was my future. No, 3 months before the state scholarship exams, 3 months before acceptance letters and rankings and gossip decided who got to leave our small town and who stayed to rot inside it. I walked into my guidance counsellor's office and rewrote my entire college list with a steady hand that surprised even me. In my last life, I had written Lakeshore University at the top in bold letters, because that's where Mason Caldwell was going, because everyone said we were a set, because the Caldwell family had taken me in after my parents died, and the world loved a pretty story about loyalty and destiny, because I was stupid enough to believe love was something you earned by being obedient. This time, I wrote Redwood University instead, the kind of school people whispered about like it was a myth. The kind of campus that looked like freedom. Mrs. Patel, my counsellor, blinked at the screen, then looked up at me like I'd started speaking another language. Hannah, didn't you always say you wanted to go wherever Mason goes? The name still hit a soft place in my chest out of habit. For a split second, the image of him flashed across my mind. Tall, clean cut, that effortless golden boy confidence. Teachers adored him, parents trusted him, girls wrote his name in the margins of notebooks like a prayer. And me, I was the orphan the Caldwells protected, the girl they kept around because my father, Captain Reed, had once dragged Mr. Caldwell out of a burning Humvee overseas and never came home himself. Loyalty, honour, repayment, those words were stitched into our lives like a family crest. Everyone said I should be grateful, so I smiled. Small, polite, final. I don't think that way anymore, I said. Redwood fits me better. Mrs. Patel studied my face, searching for a crack. When she didn't find one, she patted my shoulder like I'd finally grown a spine. All right then, let's make it happen. And I walked out of that office with my heart pounding, not with fear this time, but with a kind of quiet rage that tasted like oxygen. Because nobody knew I'd been reborn. Nobody knew I remembered what Mason did to me right before the exams. Nobody knew I was staring at my practice scores every night, like they were a lifeline. Trying not to shake, trying not to fall apart the way I had before. In my last life, I was days away from the scholarship exams when Sienna Park cornered me in the hallway, with tears already loaded in her eyes like a weapon. She'd been new, pretty in that delicate way people mistook for innocence, the type of girl who wore white sweaters and never raised her voice, and somehow still made every room revolve around her. She held up her wrist, empty, and said loud enough for half the senior class to hear, "My watch is gone," a watch Mason had, gifted her, a watch she wanted everyone to associate with devotion. She turned to me, trembling like she was the one being attacked. "Hannah, I know my family doesn't have much, and I know you've always looked down on me, but that watch matters. It's from Mason. Please, I'm begging you, just give it back." The crowd gathered fast. People love a public execution as long as they don't have to be the one bleeding. Before I could even speak, she leaned into Mason's chest like she belonged there. He wrapped an arm around her automatically, his jaw tight, eyes already cold. "Hannah," he said, like my name tasted bitter. "When you were bullying Sienna, did you ever think about what you are? That word. What? Being poor isn't a crime," he continued, voice sharpened with righteous disgust. "But letting poverty turn you into someone who steals? That's a choice. Hand it over, and we'll pretend this never happened." I remember the laughter after that. The whispers. The way people looked at me like I'd been caught clawing at scraps. I hadn't stolen anything, so how could I return what I never took? There was no proof. No cameras, no witnesses, nothing concrete. Just Sienna's tears and Mason's anger. And in that town, those were stronger than evidence. I thought it would end there. I thought he'd cool off like he always did. I was wrong. That night, while the Caldwells were out at a charity dinner, Mason came to my door with that calm voice he used when he wanted to sound reasonable. "You embarrassed her," he told me. "People are talking. Sienna can't handle that." I stared at him. "And I can." He didn't even flinch. "You've always been able to endure, Hannah. A little suffering won't kill you." Then he shut my bedroom door. Then I heard the lock click. At first I laughed, one sharp sound, like my body didn't know what else to do. "Mason," I said, louder. "Open the door." Silence. I ran to the window. The Caldwell house was a massive villa on the hill, surrounded by manicured hedges and empty streetlights. No neighbours close enough to hear, no footsteps outside, just my own breathing getting faster and faster. The next morning was the first day of the exams, 3 days that decided scholarships, rankings, acceptance packages. 3 days that decided whether Redwood was a dream or a joke I told myself to survive. I pounded the door until my fists went numb. I screamed until my throat was raw. The only answer was my own voice echoing back at me from the wrong side of my life. By dawn, desperation made me reckless. I grabbed a glass from my desk and slammed it against the window. The sound was loud, beautiful, stupid. Shards bit into my palms, blood slid down my wrists. Pain bloomed bright enough to drown out thought. I sat on the carpet, shaking in the pale morning light, pressing torn fabric to my hands, forcing myself to breathe through the nausea. I still went to the exams. I stumbled through all 3 days like a ghost, pretending to be human. My mind was a broken radio stuck between panic and humiliation, and when the scores came back, they were the worst of my life. Mason and Sienna got Lakeshore. I got a mediocre college I never wanted, and a future I couldn't recognise. And then, a few years later, Sienna arranged my death like it was a scheduling inconvenience, an accident on a rainy highway, a cut brake line, a sweet apology at the funeral. That's what love had earned me. That's what loyalty bought. So when I opened my eyes and saw the calendar again, 3 months before everything went to hell, I didn't cry. I didn't pray. I didn't waste time asking the universe why. I just moved. Back in the Caldwell house, I packed like I was escaping a fire. That villa had been a wedding gift to Mason from his parents, Victoria and Richard Caldwell, meant for him to bring home a wife after graduation. In my last life, everyone assumed that wife would be me. It was practically a town tradition. Victoria had always been kind, not warm like a mother, but courteous, careful, the way wealthy people were kind when they believed they were doing charity. I didn't hate her, which made it worse. While I folded my clothes into a suitcase, I forced my heart to bury whatever softness it still wanted to give her. Softness was how people got you. I taped my new study plan above the desk, practice exams, timed drills, essay prompts, vocabulary lists, every hour accounted for, no excuses. On the wall, there was a framed photo of Redwood's campus I'd printed years ago and hidden behind other papers like a secret prayer. I stared at it until the hope stopped feeling like a weakness. That evening, I cooked dinner because routine was camouflage. Mason came home right on schedule, and of course, Sienna walked in behind him like she'd always lived there. "Hannah!" she chirped, sweet as syrup. "Mason brought me again." "You don't mind, do you?" She looked smaller than me, softer, oval face, bright eyes, white school sweater that made her seem harmless. But I remembered exactly how sharp she was beneath the softness. She went straight to the table like she belonged, calling out, "Mrs. Turner, plates please." Mrs. Turner, our housekeeper, appeared quickly, hands moving like she didn't want trouble. Bowls hit the table, one for Sienna, 1 for Mason, 1 for Mrs. Turner, none for me. By the time I returned from the bathroom, the 3 of them were already seated, chatting and laughing like a family photo with the wrong person cropped out. Sienna took 1 bite of the food and immediately spit it into her napkin. "I'm allergic to peanuts," she gasped, eyes filling instantly. "Oh my God!" Mason was already on his feet, already cradling her panic like it mattered more than anything else in the room. He poured her soup and didn't realise until she flinched away that the base contained peanuts too. She stood, trembling, tears spilling. "It's fine. It's not your fault. Hannah probably doesn't like me." Then she ran out the door. Mason chased her to the porch, and when he came back, his face was tight with frustration, like I'd inconvenienced him by existing. I sat down and started eating calmly. "You did that on purpose," he said, voice confused, like he genuinely couldn't imagine the world not revolving around his assumptions. I didn't answer. He exhaled hard, like he was being noble about it. "Sienna's family is struggling. I bring her here for a good meal because my parents did that for you, remember?" Still I didn't answer. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Fine, if you don't like her, I'll take her out next time." A week later, he stayed on campus tutoring her. I carried a thick stack of practice exams to the public library and sat under fluorescent lights until my eyes burned. In my last life, Mason used to study with me. I used to guide him through math problems patiently, fix his essays, rewrite his notes cleaner than his own handwriting. I used to think that was love. Now I knew it was labour. When I packed my bag that night, I found a folder of achievement certificates, mine and his, stacked together like our success was a shared body. I pulled mine out. Every award I earned was mine alone, not a Caldwell gift, not Mason's reflection. I took them with me when I left the villa and drove to the old apartment building on the outskirts of town, the place I'd lived before the Caldwells took me in. It was worn down, far from the gated hills, but it held memories that belonged to me, not them. I cleaned my father's military plaque carefully. The engraved letters caught the light. Captain Hannah Reed's father, bravery, sacrifice. I swallowed the tightness in my throat. "Dad," I whispered, "I'm going to do this. I'm going to get out." 2 months left. Freedom close enough to taste. When Mason came home late that night, the dinner I'd cooked sat untouched. "I ate at school," he said casually, but the faint scent of gin on his breath told the truth. He'd eaten with her. He just didn't want to deal with the argument of bringing her here again. I nodded once, told Mrs. Turner to clear the dishes, and went to my room. Most of my belongings were already gone. Just seasonal clothes, books, and the future I was building in quiet pieces. A few days later, he knocked on my door, because one thing Mason never did was enter without permission. Not because he respected me, because he liked the image of himself as honourable. "What is it?" I asked, keeping my voice flat. He hesitated. "My mum is planning the engagement party. She thinks the 3rd day after the exams would be perfect. In my last life, that engagement was inevitable, a formality, 2 families sealing an old promise, a public celebration of a private prison." I glanced at my suitcase. "There's no rush," I said. "We can talk after Victoria gets back." He stood outside my door for a long moment, silent, like he was trying to figure out why the Hannah he knew was slipping out of his grasp. Then he walked away. When his footsteps faded, I finally exhaled, because here was the truth, the one nobody wanted to admit. I didn't owe the Caldwells my life. I had repaid them 100 times over, even in my last life, when Mason accused me, locked me away, ruined my exams. I still dragged myself to graduation like a loyal dog crawling back to the hand that hit it. That was enough. This time, I owed them nothing. That weekend, Mason surprised me by staying home. He even brought breakfast, my favourite cheap comfort food from the diner downtown, the kind he hadn't bothered with in years. We ate in silence. I scrolled vocabulary lists on my phone, not looking up. "I'll study with you today," he said, suddenly. I looked at him, genuinely startled. Then I shook my head. "No," his brow tightened. "You don't want company." Before I could answer, the doorbell rang. Sienna's voice sang through the intercom like she owned the air. "Mason!" He opened the door, and she stood there holding 2 breakfast bags, smiling up at him like the world was simple. She angled her body just enough to block my view, like she was erasing me with posture. "Why are you here?" Mason asked, but his tone wasn't angry. It was soft, protective. "I was worried you'd skip breakfast," she said, peeking around him like she was shy. "So I came to find you." I watched her face, innocent, pure, perfect. I remembered her tears. I remembered my blood on the carpet. Mason's gaze softened, exactly as she wanted. "I'll be right back," he said, and then he followed her out in a hurry, abandoning his promise like it had never existed. So much for studying with me, so much for keeping me company. I didn't feel heartbreak this time. I felt relief. Because now I didn't have to invent an excuse. I pulled up my moving checklist, lifted my suitcase, and walked out of that house like I was walking out of a story that had almost killed me. I called a moving service. I had my things delivered to a small apartment I'd rented quietly, modest, clean, mine. When everything was unpacked, I stood in the middle of that empty living room and smiled at the silence. "Dad," I whispered, touching the plaque where I'd placed it on the shelf. "Your daughter can live just fine on her own." The days blurred into a brutal rhythm: study, practice, sleep, repeat. While everyone else flirted and planned parties and chased the illusion of a perfect senior year, I chased a future. On Friday evening, Victoria and Richard Caldwell returned from a business trip. They sat on the living room sofa for a long time before Victoria finally spoke. "Hannah," she said carefully, like she was negotiating with a storm. "Mason is just close with a classmate, but you two have been promised since childhood. If he dares to back out, I'll make sure he regrets it." Richard nodded, stern. "Your parents trusted us with you. Your father saved my life." They looked at me like love and obligation were the same thing. I stayed quiet. They exchanged a glance, frustration creeping in. "You're stubborn," Victoria sighed. "Fine, we'll cancel the engagement party." She made the call right there, cancelling deposits, withdrawing reservations, erasing the event like it had never existed. Just like that, the life everyone expected me to live vanished. I let out a breath I hadn't realised I'd been holding. Then I stood, bowed politely, and thanked them, because manners were armour, and I'd learned how to wear mine well. They still didn't understand. They couldn't. Because how could I explain that I'd already lived the ending where Mason chose Sienna, and the world let him do it, and I died for it? How could I explain that this wasn't stubbornness, this was survival, and this time I wasn't walking into the exam room as the girl they could lock away. I was walking in as someone they could never touch again. I couldn't tell them the truth. I couldn't say that in another life, the people I trusted most had shattered me right before the most important exam of my life, that I'd crawled through those 3 days like a wounded animal and still tried to pretend I was fine. I couldn't say that jealousy had worn a sweet face and waited until my guard dropped, then cut my brakes like trimming a loose thread. So when Victoria Caldwell and Richard Caldwell held my hands after cancelling the engagement, calling me their daughter even without the formal promise, I simply nodded and swallowed the ache. I didn't tell them I was leaving after the exams. Not yet. For the next 2 months, I stayed, quiet, determined. I ate meals at their table. I thanked Victoria for every ride to school. I let her squeeze my fingers too tightly in the car. her voice trembling as she told me to study hard and promised she'd visit me at college every chance she got. And when I unpacked at school later that day, I found a thick envelope stuffed into my bag, cash. More than I'd ever held at one time. My eyes burned instantly. Victoria had noticed my room slowly emptying. She must have seen the missing books, the thinner closet, the drawers that closed too easily. But she never asked, she never cornered me, never demanded an explanation, never tried to trap me with guilt. She simply stood behind me like a quiet guardian, pretending not to see the door I was building. That night, I opened my suitcase to grab a change of clothes and heard Mason's voice at the door. "Is Sienna still upset?" I turned. He was standing there, one hand on the doorframe, like he had the right to claim the air in my room, his expression shifting from casual to startled when he realised it was me. "Hannah," he said, as if he'd walked into the wrong life. "What are you doing here?" I pointed calmly toward the room next door. "Your room is over there." At that exact moment, the neighbouring door cracked open and Sienna Park peeked out. She offered me an awkward little smile, soft, careful, almost shy, then retreated inside like she was the one being wronged. Mason didn't move. Guilt was written all over his face, but guilt wasn't the same thing as regret. Guilt was just discomfort, the kind of discomfort people tried to silence by making you behave. He cleared his throat. "Sienna's home situation isn't great. She lives far from school, and with the exams coming up..." He avoided my eyes. "I thought it'd be easier for her to stay here. Our place is close to campus." So it had already gotten to this point. Same roof, same hallway, and from the way he said it, like this was obvious, like it didn't even deserve an argument, I understood something cold and clean. In his mind, he'd already rearranged the house. He'd already rearranged me. Mason sensed my silence and rushed to patch it with a solution that made him sound noble. "Right. Why don't you move your stuff into my room for now?" He spoke fast, like speed could disguise wrongdoing. "I'll take the floor." Then he opened his bedroom door and frowned at the emptiness inside, as if the missing pieces offended him. "By the way, what happened to all the books in your room?" he asked. "You used to have so many." I lifted one of my textbooks, flipping a page slowly. This villa was his. This life, this role they'd written for me, had always belonged to him. Where I slept didn't matter. What mattered was whether I'd still be treated like an accessory, a convenient background character in his story. "I finished those," I said lightly. "They weren't useful anymore, so I got rid of some." Mason's brow tightened. "Even if the exams are only 2 days away, you might need them later. Why would you sell them?" I didn't answer. He didn't like my silence, so he reached for something else to control. "What about the engagement?" His voice lowered, cautious. "What did my parents say?" I placed the textbook back on the desk with careful calm. "They said the timing isn't right. We'll talk about it later." The excuse Victoria and Richard had agreed to. A delay. A soft landing. Something to keep Mason from making a scene until I was safely gone. He nodded, satisfied, because he heard what he wanted to hear. "All right," he murmured, already turning away. "Then I'll handle moving some things. You don't need to worry about it." He left like he'd done something kind. I stared at the room. Nearly empty shelves, bare corners. Only a few battered martial arts novels remained, the ones Mason and I used to read together when I still believed shared. Pages meant shared hearts. For one breath, I considered returning them. Then laughter floated up from downstairs. Mason's voice, deep, calm, Sienna's, playful, sugary, Mrs. Turner's, cheerful, indulgent. The three of them sounded so easy together, so natural, as if nothing had changed, as if I was already gone. I sat back down and said nothing. Sharing a room with Mason was inappropriate even when we were practically engaged. Now it was unbearable. But with the exam only 2 days away, leaving tonight would cause drama. And Mason loved drama when it made him look like the victim. So I waited, I decided I'd sleep on the living room couch quietly when everyone went to bed. I studied all day, eyes stinging, brain blazing, body begging for rest. I went downstairs to sleep early and found Sienna sprawled in the living room in a silky nightgown like she'd been born in this house, legs tucked up comfortably, flipping through notes with bright, restless energy. "Mason," she called, sweet as honey, "come help me with this." He glanced at me once, just once, then coaxed her upstairs like she was fragile, precious, something that needed protection. Their laughter carried through the walls, a deliberate kind of loud, the kind that said, "Hear us, remember your place." My chest felt tight, so I stepped outside for air. The night was cold and clean. Streetlights spilled pale gold over the sidewalk. My breath came out in quiet clouds. A window slid open across the way, and my neighbour, Mrs. Hayes, leaned out, her face lined with concern. "Hannah, what are you doing out there?" she called softly. "Aren't the exams soon? You'll catch a cold." The house was stifling, I said with a small smile. Mrs. Hayes's husband worked in real estate. They lived comfortably. She'd always been kind to me. Souvenirs from trips, gentle words, the kind of warmth that didn't demand repayment. She shook her head, exasperated. "That Mason, I swear he used to look so devoted. And now, bringing another girl into the house right before your exams. And you, why don't you put him in his place? You're too nice." Her voice sharpened with frustration on my behalf. "You two are practically engaged. If you let him get away with this now, he'll think he can walk all over you forever." I listened with only half my attention, because another truth had already settled in. Apparently, Mason had told people I suggested bringing Sienna home because of her poor family circumstances and long commute. He'd painted me as generous, understanding, noble. He was using me as a shield, saving his own face while mine took the hits. I almost laughed, bitterly, quietly, but I was leaving soon, and I refused to waste my last days here arguing with a man who had already decided I was convenient to sacrifice. So I nodded politely, thanked her, and went back inside. The next morning, I left early. Mrs. Hayes waved me off. Still urging me to talk sense into Mason, I smiled and waved back like I hadn't already outgrown the entire conversation. When I arrived at the classroom, there weren't many students yet. The air smelled like dry erase markers and anxiety. I opened my notebook of mistakes and started reviewing, steady as a metronome, until my gaze caught something on my desk. A watch, shiny, conspicuous, expensive enough to scream for attention. It didn't belong to me. I stared at it for a second too long and my skin went cold because some memories didn't knock. They kicked down the door. Behind me, Sienna's voice rang out, high, panicked, perfectly timed. "Mason, my watch is gone." She rummaged through her bag dramatically, eyes already glistening. "That watch was almost $10,000. I picked it up, intending to return it. Calm, simple, clean. But the second Sienna saw it in my hand, something sharp flashed in her eyes. She lunged, her palm cracked down hard on my wrist. The watch flew out of my grasp and hit the floor with a loud clatter that snapped every head in the room toward us. The murmurs began instantly, like a pack scenting blood. "Isn't Hannah the one raised by the Caldwells? How could she steal? Some people really don't change." Sienna pressed a hand to her mouth, voice shaking with innocent tears. "Mason, there has to be a misunderstanding. Hannah must have her reasons." Her words sounded kind, but they slid poison into the room anyway. Mason's face darkened. He looked at me the way a judge looks at a criminal. "Hannah," he said slowly, "do you know stealing is a crime? You could go to jail for this." Sienna's friends swarmed like vultures. "Sienna, why are you defending her? Someone like that probably has her eyes on more than a watch. And right before the exams too, she's doing this on purpose. Jealousy makes people disgusting. Call the police. The classroom spun with noise and heat and déjà vu. In my last life, this was the moment my mind broke. This was the moment I started to drown. But this time, I stayed still. I looked down at the watch. The glass was scuffed from the fall, the face still gleaming like bait. Then I looked up at Sienna and smiled. Sure, I said calmly. Call the police. The room froze. Sienna's face drained so fast it was almost comical. Her fingers clenched around Mason's sleeve. No, she stammered. Don't! That wouldn't be good for Hannah. She has exams too. Her friend snapped. Sienna, you're too soft-hearted. People like her take advantage of kindness. Soft-hearted. I let out a quiet laugh. And then, before anyone could stop me, I raised my hand and slapped Sienna across the face. The sound cracked through the classroom like a gunshot. Sienna stumbled back, stunned, cheeks swelling, eyes wide in disbelief. Mason surged forward and pulled her into his arms like a reflex. Hannah, what the hell is wrong with you? Have you lost your mind? Lost my mind? My voice stayed almost gentle. That's funny. I stepped closer, eyes locked on Sienna's trembling mouth. She accuses me of theft 2 days before the biggest exam of my life, I said, every word clean and sharp. And you want me to what? Smile through it? Let her misunderstanding ruin me again. Mason's jaw tightened. Again? I didn't answer that. I turned slightly, addressing the room. You want the truth? Check the security cameras. A few neutral students shifted, voices rising cautiously. Yeah, just check the cameras. That would clear everything up. Mason's expression flickered. Something like fear, quickly buried. Then a student hurried back from the office with a pale face. The cameras, they're out, he said. They've been out since yesterday. Of course they were. Convenient, neat. Perfect. I watched Mason's shoulders loosen, just a fraction. And that's when I knew, even if Sienna had placed the watch on my desk herself, even if she'd planned every second of this, Mason didn't care about the truth. He cared about the outcome he preferred. The principal took the watch. Teachers dragged me into the office. Mason arrived like a savior and announced, Sienna won't press charges. The school exhaled in relief because the Caldwell's influence could smooth anything over. And everyone loved a story where the rich boy forgave the poor girl. Sienna cried for an hour straight, performing innocence while Mason comforted her like she was the wounded one. He didn't look at me once. That evening, Mason found me. Hannah, he began, voice tense, like he was ready to fight. I sat and waited. He hesitated, then said stiffly, I'll sleep on the couch tonight. I stayed silent. He couldn't stand my silence, so he finally said what he really came to say. Sienna's upset, he muttered. She cried all afternoon. Couldn't you have just let her be? It's only a couple of days until the exams. Do you really have to be so petty? A cold laugh slipped out of me, soft enough to confuse him. He looked thrown. He'd expected tears, anger, pleading, the old Hannah who begged to be understood. Instead, I nodded once. Fine, I said, faint smile. Whatever you say. That simple agreement made him falter, like the floor shifted under his feet. In my last life, I'd followed Mason like a shadow. I laughed only when he laughed. I held my tears like contraband so I wouldn't displease him. Looking back, I wanted to reach into that memory and drag that girl out by the wrist. This time, I kept my distance, and Mason didn't know what to do with a girl who didn't fight for him anymore. The next day, I returned to my old apartment one day, earlier than planned. I took every personal document I had. Birth certificate, IDs, bank, papers. Anything that could be held hostage. That night, I was reviewing my mistakes when I heard a knock at the door. I assumed it was Mrs. Hayes. I opened it without thinking. It was Mason. He wore only a t-shirt, hair messy, face pale like he'd walked through the cold night wind without realizing how far he'd come. The street was quiet. A stray cat yowled somewhere in the dark. Mason stared at me like he was trying to break through my skin to find the old version of me hiding inside. "Come home," he said, voice unusually soft. I looked at him calmly. "This is my home." He reached for my hand. I stepped back. "Hannah," he whispered, panic creeping in. "Don't be mad. Please, just come home with me." He lifted a foot as if he was about to step inside, like my boundary was negotiable, like my door was still part of his property. I pushed the door half closed. His gaze dropped past me to the items on my living room table, a stack of old books, neatly bundled. Some worn certificates, a box of keepsakes. His expression shifted sharply. "What are those?" he demanded. I froze for half a breath. They were the last things I'd brought back from the Caldwell house. Books I planned to sell, pieces of a life I was cutting away. Mason's face tightened, confusion mixing with anger. "You kept them in such good condition," he said, voice rising. "You were always so careful with everything." His eyes snapped back to mine, sharp now, accusing. "And now you're selling them?" He took a step forward, as if outrage could pull me back into place, as if I still belonged to him. And in that moment, watching him stand there in my doorway like a man trying to repossess a person, I realized something quietly terrifying. The watch wasn't the real trap. The real trap was Mason finally noticing I was leaving and deciding he didn't want to let me go. "You've always been careful with your belongings," Mason muttered, almost like he was scolding himself more than me. I exhaled slowly, but my hand stayed firm on the doorknob. The door was half closed. The boundary was clear. Mason frowned, leaning forward as if he could push his way back into the version of me that used to soften when he raised his voice. "You're still upset about Sienna," he said, tone turning coaxing. "She was in a hurry. She misunderstood you. But she really loves that watch. She's always respected you. She cares about you. She even told me to come find you tonight." He stopped mid-sentence because of the way I was looking at him, not angry, not pleading, just distant, like he was a stranger who happened to know my name. His mouth moved as if he wanted to say more, but the words didn't land. He didn't know how to talk to a girl who wasn't trying to be understood by him anymore. I let out a dry laugh. "Respect?" I repeated softly. "Mason, respect isn't getting cozy with another girl when you know an engagement is being planned. Respect isn't letting her sleep in your bed while you're still tangled up in someone else's life." His face cracked, disbelief fighting defensiveness. "What cozy?" he snapped. "I just feel sorry for her. Her family situation isn't good. I'm helping her out a little." "Helping her?" I scoffed. "Does helping include sharing a bed? Or is that just part of your new charity program?" His composure visibly shook. Colour drained from his face. "Hannah, you're angry. Let's calm down. Tomorrow the driver will come pick you up," he said quickly, as if logistics could erase betrayal. Then he turned and stumbled down the hallway. I watched him go. His footsteps were hurried, uneven, fading down the stairs like a man running from a truth he didn't want to face. When the silence returned, I closed the door gently. It's funny how anger can get so extreme it turns into laughter. How had I been so blind in my first life, chasing after someone who already felt alien to me? I refused to let history repeat itself. I stayed home, studied like my life depended on it, kept my world small and controlled. Mason didn't come back again. Then one evening, while I was reviewing explanations in my mistake notebook, I heard a faint rustle outside my door. I frowned, walked over, reached for the handle. A sharp clink echoed through the quiet. A chain. Cold metal scraping metal. My stomach dropped as I tried the door again. It didn't budge. Someone had chained me in from the outside. For a heartbeat, I just stood there, breathing slowly, staring at the gap beneath the door, as if the floor might explain itself. Then I laughed once, soft and humorless. Sienna, even in a different setting, In a different timeline, she still had the audacity to pull the same stunt. Only this time, I didn't scream. I didn't pound the door until my hands bruised. I didn't waste my breath begging people who enjoyed watching me struggle. Without hesitation, I lifted my phone, turned on the camera, and documented the chain through the crack in the door. Then I called the one person I knew would answer without questions. Mrs. Hayes. Her voice turned sharp when she realized what was happening. Within minutes there were footsteps, voices, a metallic rattle. The chain fell away. "Sweetheart," Mrs. Hayes whispered through the door, furious. "Who did this to you?" I stared at the broken loop of metal in my palm and said calmly, "Someone who thinks I'm still the girl who can be trapped." I was out, and I didn't go back. The next morning, students gathered outside the exam building, jittery and bright-eyed, clutching pencils like weapons. Sienna stood among them, smiling too widely, her mood almost festive. "Don't worry," she said lightly, loud enough for people to hear. "Hannah won't be late." The confidence in her voice was smug, the kind of smug that came from believing you'd already won. Mason stood beside her and gently patted her head like she was a child who deserved praise. "Good luck," he said. Sienna tilted her face up at him, doe-eyed, and his expression softened until something flickered. Maybe he remembered the way I'd looked at him in my doorway, that detached, unfamiliar gaze. A faint unease crawled across his face like a shadow he couldn't shake. The teacher began ushering students into the exam hall. My absence became obvious. Whispers moved through the crowd. Sienna's smile widened. Inside her, joy bubbled like a shaken soda can, fizzing, unstoppable. She could already picture it. Me panicking, missing the test, my future collapsing, everyone finally seeing I was nothing without the Caldwells. She walked into the exam hall, glowing with victory. After the final day of exams, the city felt lighter. Parents bought fireworks. Schools held interviews. Social media feasted on every story it could find. A local station caught up with Jason. Hart, the perennial runner-up, the boy always one step behind the top score. The host smiled. "You're the first student we've interviewed. Was the exam difficult?" Jason looked into the camera, confident. "It was manageable." Sienna, walking behind him, slipped into frame with a sweet smile. "Jason, this time you'll finally be number one." Jason's expression tightened. "Don't set me up for failure, Sienna," he said sharply. She flinched, then scrambled to fix it, voice rising. "But Hannah didn't even show up. If you're not first, then who else could be?" Jason didn't bother answering, because Jason knew something Sienna didn't. Some people disappear before exams because they're breaking, and some people disappear because they're planning a kill shot. The next time I saw Mason was at the celebration banquet. He walked in with Sienna clinging to his arm, radiant, like she'd already been crowned. The moment he saw me, Mason instinctively shook her off. The movement was small, but it betrayed him. Habit, guilt, ownership. His smile came back quickly, practiced. "Hannah," he said, voice falsely warm. "It's okay if your exams didn't go well. You can always repeat the year. My cousin runs a great prep program. Resources are excellent. I can recommend you. With your previous performance, you'd definitely get into Lakeshore next year. You could even be our junior." I stared at him for a long second, then pressed my lips into a faint smile. "What a great opportunity," I said softly. "You should save it for yourself." Sienna's friends immediately bristled. "Don't be ungrateful. Sienna's thinking about what's best for you. Plenty of people take an extra year. Don't throw away your future because of pride." Their fake sincerity was so blatant, it was almost funny. Then Jason walked in and heard them. He glanced at the group with open disdain. "Sienna," he said flatly, "you and your pack of dogs are barking nonsense again." The room stilled. Jason's voice turned colder. "On exam day, you were practically cursing someone to fail. Now you're shamelessly suggesting a top student retake the year. That audacity is impressive. Want me to give you a trophy? Sienna's face drained. She shot Mason a desperate look, begging for backup. Mason frowned, not at Sienna, not at the cruelty, not at the trap. He frowned at Jason's tone, then he stepped closer to me like he was reclaiming control. Even if you didn't take the exam, he said in a low voice, just come home, Hannah. Even if you don't go to college, my family can take care of you. And in that moment, I understood something with terrifying clarity. No matter how outrageous Sienna was, Mason would always justify it. Her behavior would always be excused as hard life, and everyone else would always be asked to accommodate. Something inside me snapped so cleanly, it felt like breaking glass. I raised my hand and slapped Mason across the face. The sound cracked through the banquet hall. Everything went silent. Sienna froze, tears evaporating in shock. Then she lunged forward, stepping in front of him like a soldier protecting her king. "Are you crazy?" she shrieked. "Why did you hit him?" She lifted her hand to slap me. Jason's hand shot out and caught her wrist mid-air. He shoved her back hard enough that she stumbled into Mason. "I've seen enough," Jason said coldly. "A little discipline won't hurt." His smile wasn't a smile, it was a sneer. Mason's face darkened with humiliation and rage. He stormed toward me, grabbed my wrist so hard, pain shot up my arm. "You're coming with me," he hissed. "We're settling this today, once and for all." My body reacted on instinct. I shifted my weight, preparing to kick, but Jason was faster. His fist connected with Mason's jaw. Mason stumbled back, stunned. Jason stepped in front of me, arm raised protectively, like a barrier. "Are you blind?" Jason said, voice calm but dangerous. "She doesn't want to go with you. Back off. Go to a hospital and get your eyes checked." Mason clutched his jaw, breathing hard. Eyes burning into me like he was trying to pin me down with a stare. Sienna tugged his sleeve desperately. "Mason, stop! Don't fight over someone like her. She's not worth it." More classmates had arrived early. People were already watching. Phones were already lifting. Mason's expression shifted again and again. Anger, shame, confusion, entitlement. Finally, he looked at me and said, slow and deliberate, "Hannah, I'm disappointed in you." The words should have hurt. In another life, they would have broken me. This time, they sounded like the last desperate attempt of a man who'd lost his power. After they left, I stood there for a second, breathing through the leftover adrenaline. Jason looked at me, concern flickering across his face. I shook my head and said honestly, "It's just, I didn't get to kick him. You beat me to it." Jason stared, then burst into laughter, full, startled, real. "You," he said, still laughing. "I did not expect that. I didn't attend the banquet after all." Jason took one look at my expression and said, "Come on, Riverside." So we went. Families were setting off fireworks by the water, celebrating the end of exams like it was a holiday. We sat on the cold grass for 3 hours, watching bursts of colour bloom and die in the night sky. When the final sparks fell, glittering and fading into darkness, the river went quiet again. Jason turned to me, profile sharp under the streetlight, and leaned in close enough that his breath warmed my ear. "Why not consider someone else for a change?" I stayed silent, pretending I didn't hear, because right then my future didn't include love. Not yet. Not until I was strong enough that love couldn't become a leash. Then the results came out, and the world flipped. Group chats exploded. Hallways turned into rumour factories. Screenshots spread like wildfire. Sienna was taken away by police the same day she checked her scores. Hand guided behind her back, face pale, eyes wide. Photos of her being escorted into a squad car flooded every feed. At the same time, news of my ranking first in the district hit like a shockwave. Students from my exam hall started speaking up, voices loud with vindication. I told you, I saw someone sitting in her seat. You all insisted she didn't take the test. Yeah, I saw her too. She got into Redwood. I'm so proud I was in the same room as Hannah Reid. This is insane. Public opinion turned so fast it was almost violent. Old clips resurfaced. Sienna smiling into a camera, joking about Jason being number one, now repurposed as evidence of her arrogance and lies. The backlash was swift and merciless, and when Sienna, bailed out by Caldwell money, saw the screenshot of my top ranking, she fainted, hospitalized on the eve of what she thought would be my funeral. Because the truth was simple. The night she chained me in my old apartment, she wasn't just trying to scare me, she was trying to erase me, but I hadn't made a scene then. I'd filmed the chain, filmed the hallway, filmed her leaving. I'd waited, I'd let her soar to imaginary heights so the fall would be real. In this second life, I wasn't letting her walk away clean. Not again. College at Redwood was brutal, beautiful, mine. I worked part-time, I studied harder, I stayed at the top of my class like it was the only language I trusted. Rumours drifted in sometimes. Mason and Sienna had broken up. Apparently Sienna had slipped up while gossiping with her friends. Details about the watch, the chain, the locked door. Mason overheard it all, and the illusion shattered. When he realised he'd been wrong, it wasn't because he cared about what it did to me. It was because it did something worse. It made him question himself. Sienna begged and cried for 2 months. In the end, Mason gave her a big settlement and one cold sentence. Don't let me see you again. That was Mason. Always self-centered, always placing himself above everyone else. Jason also got into Redwood, and slowly, persistently, he kept showing up. Sitting beside me in class, matching my pace leaving exams, waiting outside lecture halls like he belonged in my orbit. Tonight, there were fireworks again, 5 kilometers from campus. Jason invited me, and I said yes, not because I was suddenly brave about love, but because it was time to give our story a shape. As I walked out of the campus gate, bundled in my winter coat, scarf pulled high over my mouth, I saw someone waiting in the cold. Mason, he looked thinner, paler, worn down by the kind of regret that arrives too late. The moment he recognized me, he rushed forward and pulled me into a tight embrace like possession was the same thing as apology. I struggled, pounding his chest. He didn't let go. He held the back of my head, voice urgent. Hannah, I know you're angry, but I'm glad. It means you still care. I didn't answer. I lifted my knee and drove it straight into his stomach. Mason doubled over. I shoved him back. Go home, I said coldly. Stop acting crazy. Right then, Jason arrived and took one look at the scene. Without hesitation, he shoved Mason away and stepped in front of me. Haven't you had enough? Jason snapped. Haunting her like a ghost? Mason's anger flared instantly, fueled by old humiliation. Jason, he growled. Are you coveting what's mine? He raised his fist. I stepped forward before Jason could move, voice sharp as a blade. Mason, we have nothing to do with each other anymore. Mason froze. His posture faltered, like my words knocked the air out of him. Hannah, he whispered, voice cracking. I was wrong. If I'd known you were calling off the engagement, I never would have let you leave. I would have stayed by your side. I misunderstood you. Let's start over, please. I laughed, cold, clean. No. Then I turned to Jason. Let's go. Jason didn't hesitate. I reached for his hand. He gripped mine tightly, warm and steady. Behind us, Mason stood alone in the biting wind, watching our backs like he was staring at a life he'd thrown away and only now realized was real. By the bridge, fireworks blossomed above the river, painting Jason's sharp profile in shifting color. After a long silence, he finally spoke. Hannah, Does this mean what I think it means? I started to answer, but Jason gently placed his warm hand over my lips. Let me speak first, he murmured, his eyes bright as stars against the winter night, locked onto mine. Hannah Reed, he said softly, for 3 years you've been ahead of me in rankings, in the dining hall. In my thoughts, he exhaled, breath fogging between us. I watched you study, watched you hurt, watched you chase someone who didn't deserve you. At first, I told myself it was admiration. Then I realized, he smiled, small and honest, I'm a hopeless romantic. And I'm hopelessly in love with you. He glanced up at the fireworks, nose red from the cold. I used to stand on the sidelines feeling like a terrible person, hoping for a chance that felt impossible. Then Sienna showed up, and for the first time, I could breathe, because for the first time, it looked like the world might stop stealing you from yourself. His gaze returned to me, steady. I know you're scared of love. You think it'll distract you. You always say your heart has no space for men because you need strength, you need solitude to sharpen your blade. Jason took a deep breath, hand tightening at his side like he was bracing for impact. So how about this? He whispered. I'll be the one who wields the sword for you. Will you let me? For a second, my chest tightened, not with fear, but with something unfamiliar, something gentle. Could it really be this simple? Slowly, I pulled off my gloves, reached out, and placed my bare hand into his. Jason's fingers wrapped around mine like a promise. The job is yours, I said, voice soft, smiling despite myself. Boyfriend. Jason's face lit up with pure, vivid joy. Hannah, he breathed like my name was a miracle. Hannah, Hannah. Then, voice shaking with happiness. My girlfriend.